Okay, Day 5, Chapter 9. In the afternoon, Timothy said we'd make a rope. On the north end of the island, tough vines, almost as large as a pencil, were laced over the sand. It took us several hours to tear out a big pile of them. Then Timothy began weaving a rope that would stretch all the way down the hill to the beach and fire pile. The rope was for me. It happened to be out on the reef, and I heard a plane. If he happened to be out on the reef and I heard a plane, I could take a light from our campfire, follow the rope down, and touch off the big fire. The vine rope would also serve to get me safely down to the beach. After we'd torn the vines out and he was weaving the rope, he said, "Young boss, you must begin to help with the other work." We were sitting up by the hut. I had my back to a palm and was thinking that back in Willemstad at this moment I'd probably be sitting in a classroom 3 desks away from Henrik, listening to Herr Jonker talk about European history. I'd been tutored in Dutch the first year in Willemstad, so I could attend the regular school. Now I could speak it and understand it. My hands were tired from pulling the vines, and I just wanted to sit and think. I didn't want to work. I said, "Timothy, I'm blind. I can't see to work." I heard him cutting something with a sharp knife. He replied softly, "The Hahn is not blind." Didn't the old man understand? To work, aside from pulling up vines or drawing something in the sand, you must be able to see. Stubbornly he said, "Young boss, we need sleeping mats. You can make the mats." I looked over his direction. "You do it," I said. He sighed back, saying, "The best mat maker in Charlotte Mill, down in the French town, be totally blind. But he's a man, and he has to do that to make a living." "It's true," Timothy said quietly. But in a few minutes he played several lengths of palm fiber across my lap. He really was a black mule. "The palm mat is very easy, just over and under." Becoming angry with him, I said, "I tell you, I can't see." He paid no attention to me. "Take this hand, hold the palm like this, then over and under, like the man in the French town, then more palm." I could feel him standing there watching me as I tried to reeve the lengths, but I knew they weren't fitting together. He said, "Like this, I tell you," and reached down to guide my hand, over and under. I tried again, but it didn't work. I stood up, threw the palm fibers at him, and screamed, "You ugly black man, I won't do it. You're stupid. You can't even spell." Timothy's heavy hand struck my face sharply. Stunned, I touched my face where he'd hit me. Then I turned away from where I thought he was. My cheeks stung, but I wouldn't let him see me with tears in my eyes. I heard him saying very gently, "Be getting back to work, my old self." I sat down again. He began to sing that fungi and fish song in a low voice, and I could picture him sitting on the sand in front of the hut, that tangled gray hair, the ugly black face with the thick lips, those great horny hands with wide hands winding the strands of vine. The rope, I thought, it wasn't for him, it was for me. After a while I said, "Timothy?" He did not answer, but walked over to me, pressing more palm fronds into my hands. He murmured, "'Tis very easy, over and under." Then he went back to singing about fungi and fish. Something happened to me that day on the quay. I'm not quite sure what it was even now, but I began to change. I said to Timothy, "I want to be your friend." He said softly, "Young boss, you have always been my friend." I said, "Can you call me Philip instead of young boss?" "Philippe," he said warmly. Chapter 10. During our 7th night on the island, it rained. It was one of those tropical storms that comes up swiftly without warning. We were asleep on the palm mats that I'd made, but it awakened us immediately. The rain sounded like bullets hitting on the dried palm frond roof. We ran out into it, shouting and letting the fresh water hit our bodies. It was cool and felt good. Timothy yelled that his catchment was working. He had taken more boards from the top of the raft and made a large trough that would catch the rain. He picked up bamboo lengths on the beach and had fitted them together into a short pipe to funnel the rain water into our 10-gallon keg. It rained for almost 2 hours, and Timothy was quite angry with himself for not making a second catchment because the keg was soon filled and overflowing. We stayed out in the cool rain for 20 or 30 minutes and then went back inside. The roof leaked badly, but we didn't mind. We got on our mats and opened our mouths to the sweet, fresh water. Stu Cat was huddled in a miserable ball over in a corner. Timothy said, not enjoying it at all. I liked the rain because it was something I could hear and feel, not something I must see. It peppered and burst against the frond roof, and I could hear the drips as it leaked through. The squall wind was in the tops of the palms, and I could imagine how they looked in the night sky, thrashing against each other high over our little cave. I wanted it to rain all night. We talked for a long time when the rain began to slack off. Timothy asked me about my mother and father. I told him all about them and about how we lived in Scarloo, getting very lonesome and homesick while I was telling him. He kept saying, "Ah, that be true?" Then Timothy told me what he could remember from his own childhood. It wasn't at all like mine. He'd never gone to school and was working on a fishing boat by the time he was 10. It almost seemed the only fun he had once a year at carnival, when he'd put frangipani leaves around his ankles and dressed up in a donkey hide to parade around with Maki Jubis, the spirit chasers, while the old ladies of Charlotte Amelie danced the bambola around them. He chuckled. I drank plenty rum those 3 days of carnival. I could picture him in his donkey skin wheeling around to the music of the steel bands. They had them in Willemstad, too. Because it had been on my mind, I told him that my mother didn't like black people and asked him why. He answered slowly, I don't like some white people my own self, but it would be outrageous if I didn't like any of them. Wanting to hear it from Timothy, I asked him why they were different colors of skin, white and black and brown and red, and he laughed back. Why be fish different color or flower be different color? I true don't know, Philippe, but I true think beneath the skin is all the same. Herr Junker had said something like that in the school, but it did not mean quite as much as when Timothy said it. Long after he'd begun to snore in the dripping hut, I thought about it. Suddenly, I wished my father and mother could see us together on the little island. I moved close to Timothy's body before I went to sleep. I remember smiling in the darkness. He felt neither white nor black. In the morning, the air was crisp and the cave smelled fresh and clean. Timothy cooked a small fish, a pampano, that he'd smeared at dawn down on the reef. Neither of us had felt so good or so clean since we had been aboard the Hato, and without discussing it, we both thought this might be the day an aircraft would swing up into the Devil's Mouth, if that's where we were. The pampano, broiled over the low fire, tasted good. Of course, we were eating a little, but what came from the sea: fish, lagosta, mussels, or the eggs from sea urchins, those small, black-brown sea animals with sharp spines that attach themselves to the reefs. Timothy had tried to make a stew from seaweed, but it tasted bitter. Then he tried to boil some new sea grape roots, but they made us ill. The only thing that ever worked for him was sea grape leaves, boiled first in sea water, then cooked in fresh water. But above us, 40 feet from the ground, Timothy said, was a feast. Big, fat, green coconuts. When we landed, there was a few dried ones on the ground, but the meat in them was not very tasty. In a fresher one, there was still some milk, but it was rancid. At least once a day, especially when we were around the hut, Timothy would say, "'Tis outrageous them coconut hang up in the sky when we could use the milk and meat." Or he'd say, "Timothy, my own self, long ago could climb the palm very easy." Or hinting, I guess, looking up at them, "Philippe, I do believe you be getting outrageous strong, and you're on this island." He made a point of saying that if we were only 50 again, he could climb the tree and slice them out with his knife. But at 70-odd, he did not think he could make it to the top. That morning over breakfast, Timothy said, looking to the tops of the palms, "I'm sure. A little milk from the coconut would be good now, eh, Philippe?" As yet, I didn't have the courage to climb the palms. "Yes, it would," I said. Timothy cleared his throat, sighed deeply, and put the coconuts out of his mind, but I knew he'd try me again. He said, "Them devlin coconuts aside, your mother would never be knowing you now." I asked why. "You are very brown and very lean," he said. I tried to imagine how I looked. I knew my shirts and pants were in tatters. My hair felt ropey. There was no way to comb it. I wondered how my eyes looked and asked Timothy about that. "They look without cease," he said. "They stare, Philippe. Do they bother you?" Timothy laughed. "Not me. Every day I think what rare good luck I have that you be with my own self on this outrageous humbug island." I thought a while and then asked him, "How long was it before that friend of yours, that friend in the Barbados, could see again?" Timothy replied vaguely, "Oh, many months, I do recall. But you told me on the raft it was only 3 days." "Did I say that?" "Yes." "Well," Timothy said, "well, 'twas a long time ago, but he got his sight back to be true." He paused a moment, then said, "Now I tell you, we got much work to do today." I noticed more and more that Timothy always changed the subject when we began to talk about my eyes. He would make any kind of an excuse. "What work?" I asked. "Now let me see," he said. "For one thing, we must make another catchment, and we must go to the reef for food, and—" I waited. Timothy finally exploded. "Now, that is a lot of work, Philippe, to be true." Chapter 11. Timothy had fashioned a cane for me, and I was now using it to feel my way around the island. I fell down often, but unless I fell into the sea grate, it did not hurt, even though I only got a few scratches. Slowly I was beginning to know the island. By myself, keeping my feet in the damp sand, which meant I was near the water, I walked the whole way around it. Timothy was very proud of me. From walking over it, feeling it, and listening to it, I think I knew what our cave looked like. As Timothy said, it was shaped like a melon, or a turtle, sloped up from the sea to our ridge where the palms flapped all day and night in the light trade wind. The beach, I now believed, was about 40 yards wide in most places, stretching all the way around the island. On one end to the east was a low coral reef that extended several hundred yards, awash in many places. I know it was to the east because one morning I was down there with Timothy when the sun came up, and I could feel the warmth on my face from that direction. The sea grape, a few feet tall at the edge of the beach, and higher farther back, grew along the slopes of the hill on all sides. There was also some other brush that did not feel like sea grape, but Timothy did not know the name of it. To the south, the beach sloped gradually out into the water. On the north side, it was different. There were submerged coral reefs and great shelves. The water became deep very abruptly. Timothy warned against going into the water here because the sharks could swim close to shore. Timothy said that the water all around the cave was clear and that he could see many beautiful fish. There was brain coral and organ pipe coral that the parrotfish would nibble. From what I could feel and hear, our cave seemed a lovely island, and I wished that I could see it. I planned to walk around it at least once a day, following the vine rope from the ridge to the beach and setting out along the sand. I was starting to be less dependent on the vine rope, and sometimes it seemed to me that Timothy was trying hard to make me independent of him. I thought I knew why, but I did not talk to him about it. I did not want to think about the possibility of Timothy dying and leaving me alone on the quay. Because the rain the night before had made us hopeful, I think both of us did our chores with one ear to the sky, listening for the sound of engines. But all day we heard nothing but familiar sounds, the surf, the wind, and the cries of seabirds. That night after dinner, Timothy grumbled, "No aircraft. The island must have a jumbe." "Don't talk nonsense, Timothy," I said. "Devil spirits harass and molest," he said darkly, "and we do not have a chicken or grains or corn to chase them." I said, "Timothy, you can't really believe in that. My father had told me about Obadiah, or voodoo, in the West Indies. It had come over from Africa, of course. Haiti was the worst of all for it, but there was some practice on all the islands. It was mixed up with religion and witch doctors. I knew he was looking at Stu Cat when he said, "Maybe that outrageous cat did to jump by." "He's just an old cat, Timothy," I protested. Recalling everything that had happened, Timothy said, "He came aboard the raft, and we got separated from all else. Then young boss' eyes got dark, giving us exceeding trouble. Then we float up this humbugging devil's mouth." Angrily, I said, "Timothy, Stu Cat is not a jump-by. You let him alone." The old man was silent. I was suddenly worried for Stu Cat's safety. Timothy stayed by me all night, but in the morning, when I was awakened, he was gone, and so was Stu Cat. I crawled out of the hut and began to call for Stu. Then I called for Timothy. There was no answer. I went down the hill and headed up the beach toward the reef. Voodoo was silly, I knew, but it was also frightening. I couldn't understand why Timothy thought Stu Cat was the jump-by. I decided to circle the island to find them, using my cane to feel the way to touch driftwood or coral ledges the night tide might have uncovered. I moved along the damp sand, calling out now and then. When I reached the north side, Timothy answered, "Morning, Philippe." I asked him where he'd been. He laughed. "There's this little place to go here, and I have been here on this beach." "Where's Stu Cat?" Timothy was silent. I asked again. "Be getting his own self a lizard, maybe," he answered, but there was something conniving in his voice. All the while I could hear a scraping noise and occasionally a ring of metal. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Cutting an old piece of wood," he replied. Why would he be down on the North Beach this early cutting wood? I knew he had plenty for the campfire and the signal fire. "You haven't seen Stu Cat?" "Not an air," he said. I wanted to see what he had in his hands, but I didn't have the courage to walk up and touch it. I said, "Timothy, I'm very hungry." I felt his hand on my wrist. He said, "We'll go to the hut." He fixed breakfast, we ate, and then without a word he slipped away. Usually he kept his hunting knife in his tin box that had stored our biscuits. Also in the box were the dry matches we had left, a few pieces of stale chocolate, and small things that Timothy had salvaged from the beach or the raft. I felt a few nails, the hinges that had been on the raft's trap door, some short lengths of rope and a piece of cork, several small tin cans, and a small roll of something that felt like leather. Nothing was missing except the knife, and I knew he'd taken it to North Beach with him. As best I could, I searched around the hut area for Stu Cat, thinking maybe Timothy had tied him up somewhere. Yet I was certain he'd be meowing if he was within hearing distance. I was positive that Timothy was back on the North Beach cutting out that piece of wood, but something told me not to go down there. So I sat at the hut, wondering what to do. It was no good trying to convince him that Jumbai did not exist, nor was there any way to find Stu Cat if Timothy had hidden him. The morning hours passed slowly. Once I went down to the East Beach to sit near the signal fire, hoping to hear the drone of an aircraft. Several times over the stir of the wind, I thought I heard a faint meow, but I couldn't locate the direction. Maybe all that had happened was beginning to work on the old man's mind. Maybe I was stranded on a tiny forgotten island in the Caribbean with a madman. If he harmed Stu Cat because of some silly Jumbai thing, I knew he might also harm me. I I thought about getting back on the raft and letting it drift to sea again. I was certain that there was enough boards still on top to sit and sleep on. If I could get the water keg down the hill and the last pieces of chocolate out of the box, I'd be all right for a few days. I got up and went down to the water, feeling my way toward the reef. I knew that if I kept going that way, I'd touch or fall over the length of the lifeline rope that tethered the raft. Timothy had driven a heavy piece of driftwood into the sand so that the raft would not go out to sea with the tide. I walked slowly and carefully, expecting at any moment to feel the rope with my cane or have it hit against my ankles. I went all the way to the beginning of the reef without finding it. Then I reversed my course and walked in the other direction. Finally, I stumbled over the heavy piece of wood that Timothy had driven into the sand. I felt around it, but the rope was no longer tied to it. He'd cut the raft loose. Panic swept over me, but taking my bearing from the stake, I decided to go out into the water, hoping to find the raft. A few feet offshore, I got another bad scare. I put my foot down and something moved. In fact, the whole bottom seemed to move. I lost my balance and fell headfirst into the water. I came up sputtering and realized I'd stepped on a skate, that diamond-shaped fish with a stinger tail. I'd done that once or twice at West Punt. The skate is kin to the deadly sea ray, but this one was as shocked as I was and swam off to deep water. I went out to my waist, feeling with my hands in all directions, but the raft was gone. I trusted Timothy and kept telling myself that he wouldn't harm me, but it was the whole mysterious jump-by thing that was frightening, and he certainly wasn't acting like Timothy I'd been living with. In the mid-afternoon, he returned to the hut. Neither of us spoke. Then I heard him pounding something. The palm fronds on the hut rattled. Whatever it was, he was pounding into the hut. Having finished, he went away again. When I heard him moving through the seed grape down the path, I got up and began feeling around the framing of the hut. There was nothing on the sides of it, and I decided that whatever he had detached had to be on the roof. I knew there were several lengths of log over near the campfire, so I approached it, found one of the logs, and rolled it over to the entrance to the hut. I stood on it and felt along the cross frame that held the roof up. In the very center, I found what I was looking for. I cried out when the palm of my hand touched something sharp. Then my fingers. I slowly felt around the object. It had a head. I discovered 4 feet and a tail. Timothy had spent all that time carving a cat, a stew cat. The nails in it were supposed to kill the evil jumbai. I felt weak and sat down on the log. Soon he came up the path, dropping Stew Cat into my lap. Where was he? I said. On the raft, of course, Timothy answered. I got him off the island till I could chase the jumbai. Where's the raft, Timothy? 'Twas off the shore, Philippe. 'Tis back now, and our luck is changed. But it didn't change. It got worse.